Hello, and welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox Live. I'm your host, Robert Green. I'm coming to you from a hotel room in Baltimore, so I hope the audio and video are okay, but my guests have real equipment, so we should be good. Very happy today to have as my guests John Browne and Dee Walsh from Mobilize.net. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Welcome back on the show.
Thank you. We're happy to be back. It's always good to see you, Robert.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you guys. Mobilize.net, for folks that don't know, and I'll let you guys give the longer version of it, but you specialize in helping people convert their apps from older to newer technologies.
Right.
And I say older because, of course, legacy applications mean apps that run the business, but many of them were written in older technologies, which means you don't get as much of the newer stuff. You don't get to take advantage of new things in the platform. So what do? Do you just throw it all out and start from scratch? Well, you could, but wouldn't it be cool if there were tools that helped you get to something more modern? And that is what you guys specialize in.
That is what we specialize in. Even better, we're, as you know, we worked with you back in the day. We're the crew that launched most of these products when we were at Microsoft. So the group that got you into this mess is now helping to get you out again. So yeah, we've been doing Visual Basic modernization for over 25 years, and now and we've launched a bunch of stuff. We do Power Builder, we do Silverlight, and recently we had a bunch of people come to us about ASP.NET web forms. So that one's been a big one. Ever since we announced that, we have had everyone coming to us, including you. So,
well, I did read the blog post, and I thought that this would be a great topic for one of our live shows, and here we are.
Right. Yep. And John is a nerd from way back. John, did you used to do C++ when you were at Microsoft?
Well, even before C++, yeah, I was on part of the C++ team, but long before there was C++, there was just, can you believe it? C. Not even a plus or two pluses, but only one.
Or no
pluses at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And yeah, so there was C, and then there was C++, and then there was C# and .NET Framework and a lot of stuff, but I was pretty much gone by then. Some people thought I was gone long before I left the company, but.
So yeah, so here we are with our good legacy background to handle people's legacy code. So
right. If people want to learn more, they can, of course, always go to mobilize.net, check out the large variety of your projects. But today we're going to focus specifically on web forms. What are we going to do with them?
Well, web forms is really fun. You want to show my screen maybe for a minute? Do we remember that? I think with the first version of .NET Framework, Microsoft needed a web solution for applications, right? So, after there were lots of videos of cats, people decided they could use the web for something more interesting. And they wanted to build applications that were tied to databases and that had forms on them. And it was just really hard to do it with HTML. So Microsoft came out with what many people think of today as maybe as a kludge. It was quite popular, and that was ASP.NET Web Forms, which built on the original ASP.NET, which was just a server-side way to generate HTML and then update every page as the client did something, which was really slow. So this was a little better. It took advantage of .NET Framework. But I think the thing that was cool about it from a lot of people's point of view was that, kind of like Visual Basic, you had a toolbox of controls and you had a designer window. And that's what we're looking at here in this little sample app. And you could just drop these controls on here, and then down here in the bottom right side of your screen, just like, again, like in Visual Basic, you had all these properties and you could just set them, okay? And just change stuff that way. If you wanted to write code, you could click on a control and it would take you right inside the code. It would scaffold the code for you. And you could actually build these simple controls. So let's run this guy just so we have a look at what it looks like running in the browser.
And as the name would suggest, it felt similar to Windows Forms development, which was kind of the point.
Yeah, exactly, right? So for Microsoft developers, this was a real familiar paradigm. They could use a lot of the server-side code that they were already familiar with. They had the framework that they could use. They were already familiar with a lot of these standard controls, like from WinForms or from VB. And so it was a quick and dirty, well, it was a quick way to get these developers writing these web applications without necessarily having to get way down in the woods with some of the HTML stuff and some of the scripting things.
But what we realized in looking at folks, what they're bringing to us is they may have started out simple, but we're seeing some pretty
yeah, absolutely.
stuff. Yeah, the bulk of everything that's coming to us are pretty sophisticated, massive, complicated, big time apps. So people went, and most companies that stuck with this really built some sophisticated stuff.
And you can see right away that one of the big advantages of web forms is how fast the application loads inside the browser. Clearly something is wrong here.
I don't know if I'm going to blame that on web forms. Okay, so
well, let's shall we just
maybe move along? Yeah,
move on, shall we?
Pay no attention to the spinning circle.
This wants to work. I don't know quite why not. Let's just end the painful part of that and tell it to stop. So what we've done is the approach that we take with all of our stuff is that we have a set of tools that are sort of built into a single application, and it reads the whole tree of source code for a particular solution. So in this case, it reads all of the designer files, it reads all of the C# files, and then it separates out all of the client-side user interface stuff and builds an Angular application out of that. And then it takes all of the back-end stuff and leaves it largely intact. We're trying to keep the actual code to be really familiar to the developers. So we're not trying to really change like the namespaces, the variable names, the object names, class names, form names, things like that. We leave all that intact, but we convert it over to ASP.NET Core. So you have
is that what the mobilize.webmap is?
Yeah, Mobilize Web Map is this family of tools that have a common sort of core, but they can take different inputs, like, for example, C# Web Forms, VB.NET Web Forms, Power Builder, ASP.NET Web Forms, and so forth. And then they output a very similar architecture, which is ASP.NET Core on the back end and an Angular application on the front end.
Cool.
And then we built RESTful endpoints to basically update state with JSON messages. So, and that's what we're looking at here. So having run the migrator, which takes 10 seconds to run, it's just a command line tool. We build out this new application structure. And if we look over here in our folder tree, let me just shrink this a little bit, and I'll get to what we're looking at here in a minute.
So for a large web forms app, you run the converter, it only takes 10 seconds to...
Well, maybe it takes 2 minutes, but
wow.
it runs pretty fast.
Fast. That part of it's pretty fast.
Yeah, it really does. It runs very fast.
And the cool thing about WebMap 2, the product, is that we sort of have this foundational technology. So it's sort of backward looking, like a lot of the technology that we have is what's been, required for the past 10 years, but we have this foundation. So as things come to us, like web forms, where all of a sudden, kind of suddenly, everybody wanted that transformation, we were able to pretty simply add that to the tool set. So we sort of have this IP that's extensible and can be built on.
Right.
Right. So let me just go down to, okay, so if you look, here's what actually comes out of the tool. There's a source and a target. So the source was just all we saw before. The code's still in the solution file, right? So that's your old ASP.NET Web Form stuff. And then in the target, basically, there is a hiring tracker site Angular. So the name of the application is hiring tracking site. It's just a little thing to keep track of applications and stuff, right? Just a sort of a fake little app. And also there's all of the original files, as you see, are down here. And for example, we've got one of them open right here. So this is our client list ASPX C# file. And it's largely the same. If you were to do a diff on it to the original file for the web forms version, you wouldn't see a lot of changes. There are a few things that we're doing. One of which is that we're using this observable tag here because we're watching for state changes on the client. Okay, so the application's basically sitting and waiting for messages to come from the client that says state has changed. Route this new data through the model and figure out what you want to do with it in the business logic. So typically on these kinds of applications, there's a lot of database CRUD updates, right? A lot of CRUD transactions. And so you go out and you do something with the database, you get a return from the database, you rebuild the view model, and you send it back over to Angular, and then Angular figures out like how to change the actual presentation layer that the client's showing inside the browser. Okay, so as a good Angular app, we have, of course, everything is components. And so if we click down here and we go down to our, I got a new mouse and it likes to jump around, I apologize. We go down into here. We see for every form, like the client details form, the client list form, and of course the default, the index page that comes up on an app, is we have a we have a CSS file, we have the HTML that's being used, okay, and we have the model itself in the TypeScript as the component model, which has all the imports and the exports and anything else we're going to do. And so what we've done in the HTML is we basically just created an element for every user interface element on the form, okay? And what's nice about this is that the IDs are all the same names that we had back in the original application. So again, the idea is to just make it really easy for a developer to jump from this old technology to new technology and sort of be able to find their way around the new application code without really getting hopelessly lost.
Mm-hmm.
Now what's cool right here, let me just show you where this came from. I guess I should have had this open in my browser beforehand. If you go to GitHub, Mobilize Net, and come down here. So this is where we keep all our sample code, all right? And so it's kind of a cool place to go and poke around. Come back. And right here, this web forms demo is what we're looking at. It's like one of those dreams where you're trying to run underwater, right? If you come down to the README, so this is where people can get the same thing. And this is, a screenshot of the application. But what's interesting, I wanted to show you this. Come here. So we have a local version that you can build. You have to install Node and you have to do, build it in .NET or in Visual Studio to build the backend. And then you have to install Node and all the usual things with Angular and then build that version. But there's an easier way, which is what we're going to show today, which is you can actually build it inside a container. And one of our engineers who's like way smarter than I'll ever be figured out how to build 3 Docker containers, one for the ASP.NET Core backend code, one for just the database, so it's running like SQLite or something, and it has the database in it, and then one for the whole Angular application. And so if you invoke all 3 of those containers and get them running, you can actually run the whole application inside, wait for it, Visual Studio Code, which I think is just super cool.
So before we get to that, answer this.
Yeah.
Does this work on complex web form applications? And how complex?
Yeah. Well, they're all complex, let's face it. What Didi was talking about is true. The fact of the matter is when people come to us, it's because typically they have an application that's extremely large. It's important. It's critical to their business, right? They can't just ditch it. And it's complex. So usually what that complexity means is that it was built over a long period of time by just basically adding and adding and adding. And a lot of different developers worked on it. And some of those developers brought their own patterns, their own style, their own approaches to it. Some of them maybe were better than others. And so you have this code that maybe is very difficult to read. Maybe there's no documentation typically, but it works because over the years, a user reports a bug, the developers go in, they figure out how to fix the bug. Maybe the way they fix it is to rely on some weird behavior that's particular to that particular platform or something. They don't necessarily document it. They leave dead code in there. They do a lot of copy paste. It's just, it's a mess.
Mm-hmm.
As they start to evaluate, like, how do we modernize this? They go like, well, maybe we should rewrite it. And then they realize just how challenging that will be because of the size, because of the complexity, because of the difficulty in verifying the final version.
Or a lot of times they do start to rewrite it and then they fail. And
yeah,
that's how we get a lot of it.
yeah. They fall behind. So it's just hard. And so our approach, is, I won't say that our approach is the be all and end all, but it's a really useful approach for these kinds of applications because we're able to largely move the business logic code straight forward without having to change it dramatically. Okay. And because of that, typically whatever worked before will work in the new application. We get a new user interface, but it's the same as it's the same as the old interface. We're going to try and be faithful to that original interface look and feel. The reason for that is to avoid having the customer have to retrain all their users. Okay.
Right.
Doesn't mean they can't rebuild the user interface because it's all written in Angular and it's written in HTML and CSS. And we're using Bootstrap on this one. So there's a lot of scope they have there to change it around. But typically what they want to do is just move that underlying platform and code to a modern structure. And then over time, as they maintain this new app, they can go in and they can refactor okay, here's something that should be a class. Maybe it's doing 15 different things. So it's violating the keep it simple program, keep it simple pattern. So they break it into multiple classes. They find a bunch of copy paste that they can combine into a single class, things like that. So that's where some of this refactoring can come into play without breaking the app or having a big time period where they have to spend a lot of money and a lot of developer resources trying to get just up to ground zero with it.
Right. So a couple questions on UI. What do you do about third-party controls like Dev Express and others? And then also user controls.
Right. Great question. So we are using, the default that we use is the Kendo UI set of Angular controls from Progress Software. It is quite possible to replace that with a different set of controls like Syncfusion, Dev Express, Infragistics. We haven't had a customer bring that requirement to us yet, but we did architect the way the front end code is structured so that it could be replaced. It's not necessarily a monumental task, but it's not a trivial one either, but it definitely can be done.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one, user controls. Yeah, we'd have to look at those, but we should be able to support user controls.
Okay. Do you convert HTTP handlers and HTTP modules?
I'm not sure what those are. Sorry. Can you explain it to me?
Not being enough of a web guy.
Yeah, I'm not a web form guy at all. Again, we're leaving the backend code largely intact. So if they've written a bunch of sort of custom HTTP stuff that's invoked by the backend, we probably have to look at that. Maybe they can just leave it alone and it'll just work with the new backend. I don't know.
Okay, and then what about authentication?
Yeah, if they have authentication of the old app, they'll have authentication of the new app, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So those are the questions at this point.
Those are some good ones, huh? We should have had a smart guy on the call and on the stream, and then they could get answered. Somebody like Mauricio.
I know. I'm trying to see if Mauricio's around to ask him a question.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let me just show you what you have to do here. So if you get this, you can just download the zip file, and we have these three containers. You have to install Docker, okay, and you have to have the Docker desktop running. So I've got it running.
Is this the right screen? Right now we're looking at code. There we go.
So there it is. So this, and you can see that this thing's already started. So it's sitting here running. This container's been running for a long time. And then in Visual Studio, if you go to the extensions thing, you want to find this little guy right here, which is the remote containers extension. Okay. And so you install that in Visual Studio Code rather. And then when you open up once you have Docker running, you get the desktop installed, you get Docker running, and you open up this directory in Visual Studio Code, it will know right away that this is a container version. And so it'll ask you if you want to start the containers up. And so you go, yeah, I want to do that. And then after a few minutes, you'll see this little Docker icon down here on the bottom left. If you click on that, you'll see your containers up here. So here's the backend container, and here's the node container for the client, and here's the database container here. Mm-hmm. And if you're puzzled, you can right click on them and you can look at the logs. Like if they didn't start, you can see like maybe why. You can stop it, can restart it. So you want to make sure that these little green arrows here, these little triangles, tell you that they're actually up and running. Okay. And so if they are, then you just come down here and you open up a new terminal. And you want to just go to the target directory. Remember, we had a directory for all the original source code, and then we have a directory for the target. I'm just going to change it to the target here. And then what we're going to do is just do a .NET run, which is like the coolest thing ever. It's just going to magically start all this stuff up. And in a couple of minutes, this thing will be up and running. So do you have any more questions while this gets going?
Not. There's a question about integrated crystal reports. What happens if someone's using crystal reports?
Typically what we do with these web applications is we use SQL Server Reporting Service, SSRS. Okay. And so we move those report definition files over to SSRS, or the client can do it themselves. But that's a really good solution for these web applications that are running ASP.NET Core. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So here it's getting started, and it's just telling me that it's nagging me about a package. It doesn't like the version of, but that's irrelevant, really.
All right. So there was a question earlier about pricing.
Okay.
Talk about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. So this particular technology right now is available as a service from us, where we will migrate the code for you, and then the customer can validate that it matches the original application. Typically, the way that works is there's a set of tests that the customer delivers to us. If they don't have them, then we can work with them to write them. But the tests are basically based on the original application, and then we can validate that the application, after it's migrated, passes those same tests. So then it's what we call functionally equivalent to the original application. Now, the pricing itself varies with the size and complexity of the application. Typically, it's based on the number of lines of code in the original application. And then if there's patterns or components that we don't currently have translation maps for, then we have to map those. There might be some additional customizations the customer wants. So the best thing to do is, if you go to our website, there's a tool called Rapid Scan that you can download, and it will inventory your source code for these applications and tell you how many lines of code you have, how many components you have, how many forms you have, and stuff like that. And you can send us the output of that scan. It just collects some metadata and creates a CSV. And then we can get on the phone with you and ask a few questions and then give you a rough idea of what it would cost for us to work with you to get these applications done.
Mm-hmm. We're also, we have a form on our website because we are still in sort of a pre-release with this. We ultimately want to have a downloadable tool, but that is in the future. So we've got a form to complete to join our pre-release program.
Okay. And I know that Mobilize does lots of other types of conversions. So are they always services? Are they usually downloadable tools?
Both.
Yeah, most, a lot of them, we have a downloadable tool for Visual Basic, and that's, everybody just licenses that tool. And then we have web map, parts of it are downloadable. So we do the bulk of our business is license, and then we do some amount of consulting because
Okay.
you have to. But what we like, one thing that a lot of customers like is if we do the conversion but not the services. So we just convert the code and then give you the code. So it's a lot of times it's easier if we run the code, because then we can, there's a lot of customizations that we know how to do with the tool without, very easily, where it would take a customer a lot longer to learn it. So we'll often just do the conversion and then hand over the code.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, well, we're running, so let's take a look at the application, and then so if you click on the ports here, you'll see all the places where it's running. We've hard coded 4200 in here. So what I'm going to do is go up to my browser and just go to localhost 4200. It worked.
Yay.
And by the way, Mauricio said that we are not yet supporting HTTP handlers and HTTP modules. We hadn't considered that, but we would love to see that code. That's what he said.
So whoever put that in, please get in touch with us, info@mobilize.net, or hit my Twitter handle there on the screen, and we'll hook you up with a guy that can take a look at it and we can talk about it. So here it is, and we see here's our grid control that we were looking at before. There we go. So it looks pretty faithful to the original app, which is what we've been trying to do. Now, one of the things I want to show, because I think this is very cool, typically when you're working in Visual Studio.
Clients there.
What's that?
You got some pretty high priced clients there.
Yeah.
Satya, wow.
Oh, yeah. So typically what you have to do with these applications is, if you want to make a change in the back end, you have to recompile everything. If you make a change in the front end, you have to rebuild the whole bundle of www root, and then you have to update that over on the back end side, and then you got to rebuild it again. So it's just a really slow process to sort of change things around. Well, if we wanted to change the user interface here, running in containers, it's really quick. Let's say, for example, that I changed the name of the application from the original one, which was hiring tracking site. I changed it to Acme Corp in honor of Roadrunner. So let's say Roadrunner's out of business now. We want to change that back. So I can just change the HTML here. I'm going to save it by hitting Control S. And then if we go back to our browser, what's going to happen is it's going to update automatically.
By the way, Roadrunner didn't run Acme. He was a customer of Acme.
Yeah, I know, but I think he was their only customer, because I think they had a lot of product liability lawsuits based on some of the things that happened. Robert, I think StreamYard is killing my computer here. Yeah.
It's going a little slow.
Things are not working the way they should.
Well.
So this should update right away. It usually takes 5 seconds to update. So why is this not working? I don't know.
Because we're live. I mean, that is the way.
Yeah, that is the way, isn't it? Let me, maybe Visual Studio is eating up too many resources. Let me get rid of this guy because we're through with him.
One other common question that we get a lot is, does it support VB.net? Because, Robert, let's face it, we did such a good job of evangelizing VB over the years. And we have another tool to convert the VB.net code to C#. So that's...
We do. Yeah. Okay, so there's the change. And if you're not running StreamYard with Robert Greene, this actually takes it's a lot quicker.
Oh, so now it's my fault. It's slow.
Oh, I'm blaming you. I got to blame somebody because
I think somehow it's going through your hotel in Baltimore, like going
yeah,
from
I think so too.
Bellingham to Bellevue to
Yeah.
Baltimore.
You know, and again, I talked
triple
about
Ps.
how, yeah, you know, you can change the, you know, you don't have to live with the same UI. So, like for example, in where's my Bootstrap? Let's get rid of that guy. Get rid of that guy. So over here in Bootstrap, like if we were to go back to this guy and go like, well, what is this thing here? Let's go into Dev Tools and see. Let's see, what is this? Oh, it's an H1. Okay, yeah. So in a Jumbotron. All right. So then we go back to here and we go like, oh, here's our Jumbotron. Let's see. Oh, here's my H1. Oh, yeah, it's 60 pixels. That's a little on the in-your-face size. Let's go down to like 40, right? And then save that. And then we go back to this guy and close that. And again, it's going to refresh and reload. And once again, it's going to take a while to see the change. So any other questions?
The only one who pointed out that Wile E. Coyote was the customer, not the business owner.
Yeah. Trevor,
Come on, I knew that.
Yeah,
there are Acmes that actually are real companies.
Right? Didn't that used to be back in the old days of telephone books? You wanted to have Acme because you went to the front of the telephone of the Hello pages. Did it work yet?
Yeah, it worked. And now it's gone again. What happened?
I'm going to blame Robert.
There it is. Look at it quick before it changes. Okay, we made the H1 smaller now. Okay.
So here's a question. So you have a web forms application, and you wrote it. Your company wrote it. So you've got experts in web forms, and now you've converted it to ASP Core as well as Angular. So what assumptions can we make about what people need to know about ASP Core and particularly Angular? So do you wind up going from being a web forms expert to having code that's now written in Angular that you may or may not know anything about? What are best practices for managing that?
So that is a great question, and it comes up all the time because a lot of times I think it's safe to say that the people who are deep into maintaining these first generation web technologies are not up to date on whatever generation we're up to now, which is about 700, right? Mm-hmm. And Angular can be intimidating. Now, for the approach that we've taken, which arguably makes sense from our point of view and from our customers' point of view, is that we have hidden a lot of the Angular, abstracting it inside of our technology. Okay, so when you actually look at, for example, the HTML, right? Not that guy. Bring back up my folders here. So like this guy here, okay, notice this is pretty straightforward. So let's take this label, okay? So you notice that we have a WM-label. Well, WM stands for web map. So we have a layer for all of the user interface elements that all start with WM as a prefix, okay? And then what we've done is that translates into a Kendo UI label control. And that's the reason that it's fairly doable to swap out one user interface library for a different user interface library, okay? Because we're importing Kendo UI and we're calling it from here, but we could be importing Infragistics and then calling it with the definition of WM label. The ID over here, ID label 1, is the same ID that was used as a variable name in the original web forms application. So the developer doesn't really need to know how Angular is working at the component level to do this because we basically buried it under this layer of what the user has to deal with, okay? Now, if they want to change the application, all they really have to do is follow the patterns that we've created here, and it's pretty easy. Here's a place where copy paste actually works because let's say you wanted to create another label, you just copy the code for ID label 1, paste it in the appropriate places, CSS, HTML, and in the TypeScript files, right? and boom, you'll have it. Then you go over to the back end, you go find the handler. Well, there's no handler for a label, but you go find those objects that you want, copy and paste those and change them. So it's fairly straightforward to do this. And we did a video on that using Silverlight. Was that year before last, Dee Dee? When did we do that thing with Alyssa and Nicole? I don't remember now.
I think it was just last year.
Maybe it was just last year. And it's,
but remember, last year was 3 years long, so that's why you're
kidding. Oh my God.
That's right.
Very happy it's not last year anymore. Yeah, I went into Costco yesterday and people like, hey, you don't need a mask anymore if you've been vaccinated. I'm like, holy mackerel, get this thing off my face. Okay, yeah, seriously. When you have a beard, it just always itches to have a mask on there.
I know, that's my problem too.
Is that why you don't wear a beard now? You shaved off?
Why?
Nice and close. I saw you yesterday and it looked like you had to go on there.
Right?
Right. What was I talking about? I have no idea. So
you were talking about the Silverlight.
Yeah. So we did a video where Alyssa wanted to add a Kendo control that didn't have a corollary back to the original set to one of our applications. And so she and Mauricio walked through it. And, you know, it's absolutely doable. There's a number of steps, but they're all pretty straightforward. And once you've done it once, you can do it the next 50 times, pretty straightforward. I will probably make a video or a blog post or something about exactly how to do that with this stuff as well. And if people are confused about the whole container thing, I'm going to write up exactly the process here because there was a little bit of troubleshooting Mauricio and I had to go through. For example, we had to figure out how to get the browser to refresh, and it seemed like it should happen automatically, but it turned out it wasn't. So we had to go in and change a couple of things. And there were a few other little gizmos, but once we got it figured out, it works great. And what I learned is always start Docker first, because if you want it to run in Docker, it has to have Docker running.
It's always
like, every time I do this, I forget. Like, oh yeah, start Docker.
You got it here first. A best practice from John.
Yeah. Did you learn how to drive the same way? The car has to be on for the pedal on the right to do something.
The first year of my career, I did tech support for a small software company, and anytime anybody called and couldn't print, you know, every single time it was because the printer wasn't on. Every time.
Yeah.
All right. No additional questions at this point. So what's next?
Well, I got nothing. How about you?
Do you mean what's next with what we've got going on? Or what's in our demo?
Well, first we'll start with the demo. And if the demo's over, then you can talk about where you see this product going in the future, what issues you've run into. You're in preview now, so where does it stand? What's the time frame? What's coming up?
Right, so we're in preview now. Well, actually, we're kind of in pre-preview. We're people can apply for our beta, and we will then send it to them as they come in, the pre-release. And we are still kind of we're still deciding how we want to release it. So that's all in TBD. But the way we generally work is we try to collect as much code as possible because that's how our tool gets smarter the more code that goes through it. So if you have code, we'd love to see it and we'd love to run it through because that helps us to enrich the tool. And so, you know, like our Visual Basic tool, I mean, it's been out forever and it's still, I think we're releasing a new version next week because we continue to get, you know, people are infinitely creative with what they do with code. And so there's always something new that the tool can learn and do better. So that's where we're at. We'll continue to enrich it. We feel we have one of those products that is never done. So we will. So we expect the actual release probably in the latter part of the year, which we're kind of getting close to. The first release, and then we'll continue to enrich. We're on a sprint like everyone else. So, you know, a couple of times a month you'll see new stuff slot in. That's how we...
Yeah, we're going to have improved support for Turkish windows if that's been bugging you.
Nice.
Which, Robert, I know that's an issue for you. So,
Well, you know,
A lot of people.
yeah, you know, the particularly our older tool, our oldest tool, the Visual Basic Upgrade Companion, gets used all over the world.
Mhm.
And so we see some really interesting things sometimes from people that have, let's say, a variety of different approaches to writing code in different languages. So yeah, Turkish
we had
windows.
come to us 2 weeks ago, Robert. We get these for Fox Pro.
Yeah, I don't even want to know what you told them.
Good old Fox Pro. Does Microsoft still release Fox Pro? Is it still part of Visual Studio?
No, it is not. I
Are you still selling?
I think 9 was the last version. I don't think anything after that happened, but that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
All right. So anybody, any viewers have any questions?
Somebody's sad that web forms are going away.
Yeah, I will plug one other thing we didn't mention,
Yeah.
which is we have also in a very early version a tool that can convert Microsoft Access to this exact same model, which is Angular front end and ASP.NET Core backend. And we do it in a very interesting way, which is we wrote a tool that converts Access to VB6 because why not? And we happen to have tools that can take VB6 all the way to the web. So, you know, we get it onto the freeway ramp the best way we can, and then we know we take it all the rest of the way. So we're starting to do some client work on Microsoft Access to web. And it turns out there's a lot of access out there. And people are, you know, they've been tired of it probably since day one, and they're really tired of it now.
I think we may have asked this and answered this question earlier, but we have time. So Anas is asking about custom controls.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we'd have to see the control to figure out like what it's going to get mapped to. If it's a custom control because there wasn't anything in Windows, you know, or an existing library. So, you know, you just have to create some Angular component that maps that and figure out how to draw it, how to handle events and properties and so forth, and then add that. So we customize these tools constantly for customers because they'll have stuff that they wrote that nobody else in the world has. Because let's face it, virtually every platform, except for maybe, I don't think you could really do this much in Power Builder, but everything else, you could write your own stuff. You could use what came out. You could go buy a library of stuff, or you could write your own stuff. And then, you know, you want to be able to reuse it. So we have to customize to map those sorts of things all the time. So yeah, that's a very familiar step for us.
Right. Okay.
Somebody's moving COBOL to the cloud.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
How hard can that be?
All right.
Well,
so we'll give a couple more minutes to see if there's additional questions, and if not, then all right. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. Any questions, of course, ping John, ping Didi, go to mobilize.net, chat with them, and see what can be done with your apps.
And we're both on Twitter all the time and every social, so we can reach out to us anytime. We're always around.
Yeah.
Where else are we going to go? Unlike you, Robert, who's traveling. Look at you.
I know. That's awesome.
Very cool.
I'm not ready for that yet.
I'm totally ready.
Oh, so ready.
So, are there additional comments? Nope. Okay. In that case, thanks everybody for watching. Didi and John, thanks so much for coming on. And we will see everybody next time on Visual Studio Toolbox.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, I got to click that.